friends. How are you all doing? Good evening, good evening. And here we are for our second lesson here for This Can Happen. So let's kick this off. Here we go. So all right. So this can never happen, right? Let's make sure we got that striked out of it there. And we want to thank the course sponsors, Mrs. Leslie Gunsberg, Mrs. Faye Braverman for sponsoring this course in loving memory of Michael David Schramm, Leslie's son of blessed memory. And here we are for today's lesson. Who needs a redemption? Who needs a redemption? That's what we're doing over here. I'm going to be muting all of you, as we usually do. But of course, and as I always mention, feel free to unmute and kick in with a question, with a comment, with an answer. And here's what we want to do today. This is the agenda, right? We want to set the agenda. Last week, we began our course topic. This can happen. And we were focusing on Mashiach. And last week was more of a unique niche class where we didn't really get too much into what is Mashiach, right? The what, the why, the how, the when of this topic, but we more discovered the unique times that we live in and what Judaism has to say about the times that we live in, vis-a-vis Mashiach, and it's an unbelievable, very, very fascinating topic. But with that introduction of last week, this week, let's really get into the topic at hand. Let's really understand what is Mashiach, right? What is it? Let's really understand the Jewish definition of this concept. We want to get down to the bottom of it. What is Mashiach really? So let's start doing some digging. Let's start doing some reading. And that's a goal of today's class. We want to get a wholesome understanding, a proper definition for this topic. Let us begin with our first text. Text 1 from Maimonides. And what Maimonides does here in this text, we read a little bit of this text last week, but what Maimonides does in this text is he collects, he summarizes all the different prophecies in the Torah from Moses and through all the prophets, and kind of gives us a general overview of what the Messianic era looks like in Judaism. So let us begin, and as we usually do with the readings, we'll go around through this virtual Zoom room. So Sharon, would you like to begin? We'll be beginning on page 45, text 1. If you're up to it, Sharon.
Yeah, I had done mute me.
All right, wonderful. Okay.
I'm sorry, page 45.
Page 45, yes.
Okay, give me a minute.
No problem.
Oh, okay. Next one. The king, Mashiach is
Mashiach.
Mashiach is destined to arise and restore the sovereignty of the house of David to its former rule. He will build a temple and gather the dispersed of Israel. In his days, all the Torah's laws will be reinstated.
You can continue. Let's do the whole.
When there arises a king from the house of David who studies Torah and fulfills the mitzvot like his ancestor David in accordance with both the written Torah and the oral Torah, and he will influence all of Israel to walk in its ways and repair its breaches. And he will fight the battles of God. He is presumed to be Mashiach. If he does this and is successful, and he builds the temple in its place and gathers the dispersed of Israel, then he is definitely Mashiach. He will then improve the entire world to serve God together as it is written. Then I will transform the nations to a pure language that they will all call upon the name of God and serve him with one purpose. In that era, there will be no famine or war, no envy or competition, for goodness will be in abundance and all delights will be as commonplace as dust. The sole occupation of the world will be only to know God, as it is written, the earth will be fulfilled with the knowledge of God as waters cover the sea.
All right, so here we go. My mind kind of lays out this whole vision of what the time of Mashiach is going to look like. You know, when I learned this, with a pen, I just started making numbers to try to kind of number how many details there are. I counted 11 details 11 elements to the Messianic era, right? And we have over here a list, you could call it an eclectic list of universal ideals, religious ideals, spiritual ideals. We kind of have here this entire bucket list of visions and dreams and aspirations. All this together is Mashiach. But here's my question for you. We have lots of stuff here, lots of details of what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. World peace, a new holy temple, Israel, lots going on. My question for you is, but what is the essential definition of Messiah in Judaism? Mashiach, redemption. What is it? Not what's going to happen, not what are the details of it. In one line, what is the definition of Mashiach? And I'll tell you, there is I don't even know where it comes from, but there's a concept, there's a metaphor, I think it's used in the world of philosophy, called the blind men and the elephant. Are you familiar? The metaphor is that they took a bunch of men and covered their eyes, and they said, describe what you're feeling. And they put each one in near a different part of an elephant. So I'll share with you here my screen. This is an illustration of it. So you see, each one is touching something else. So the one that's holding the trunk says, this feels like a snake. The tusks, it's a spear. The ears, it's a fan. The body, it's a wall. The tail, it's a rope. And the one at the foot says it's a tree. Feels like a tree. And you look at this, and the idea of this metaphor is none of them are wrong. They're all right. Each one are describing what they're feeling. And they're right. An elephant, in some degree, from a certain perspective, does feel like all these things. But at the end of the day, nobody really got down to what is it, right? It's an elephant. Nobody said that. So this is an idea that's also in Judaism. When we want to know what is something, what is the essence of something? Don't tell me about it. Don't tell me the manifestations of it. Don't give me the symptoms of it. What is it? What's the essence of it? And that's going to be our quest for tonight. What is Mashiach? Don't tell me about Mashiach. What is Mashiach? And that is the goal, that at the end of tonight's class, we should all understand the Jewish definition of what is Mashiach. And I think it is safe to assume that it's going to shock you, it's going to surprise you, and it's going to be something pretty new. What is the Jewish Messiah? There's a person, there's a movement, there's a redemption, but what is the essence of it all? That is what we're after today. And we could also start asking some more specific questions. Are all of these things really necessary? Do Jews really need a third temple in Jerusalem? I'm saying we've been doing pretty okay without a third temple for 2,000 years. Maybe this was part of the Jewish program 2,000 years ago that we had a holy temple in Jerusalem. Do we need that today? Why is a holy temple part of our vision of world peace? Why does the world need a holy temple in Jerusalem? So kind of how do we find a thread, a unifying theme that every detail about Mashiach can essentially be brought down as a symptom, as a manifestation of this core idea? That's what we want to get to. What is the core idea that stands behind Mashiach in its entirety? We want to get the inside story. All right, so if we want to get the inside story, we have to start exploring a little bit. We have to start discovering a little bit. And one of the first things that happened when we explored Judaism's perspective and the place that Mashiach has in the Jewish canon, there's something quite weird that emerges. And what happens is you realize that Mashiach is not just another topic in Judaism, but Mashiach is a pervasive topic, a pervasive feature of every single last detail in Judaism. And I want to just share with you a few areas where we see this, central areas, and it gets one thinking. what's going on over here? And the idea is here that there's something more than what the eye sees at the surface when it comes to this topic. Mashiach seems like just another Jewish idea. Okay, it's another good Jewish topic. But when you look at Judaism, you see that Mashiach is a little bit more important than that. I want to go through 4 areas of Judaism and just see how pervasive Mashiach is in these areas. I want to talk about Jewish prayer, the Jewish calendar, Jewish life cycle events, and Jewish faith. Let's begin with prayer. So we all know that the centerpiece of the daily Jewish prayer is the Amidah. When we stand up, and that is really the pinnacle of prayer. When we stand up, we put our feet together and we focus, and that is when we actually talk to God. The rest of prayer is kind of in addition to the Amidah. The Amidah is the centerpiece of our daily Jewish prayer. It's when we turn to God and ask God point blank for our needs. There's a mitzvah to ask God for your needs. That's the mitzvah. Ask God for what you need. Ask God for blessings. So we do that 3 times a day in the Amidah prayer. The Amidah prayer is relatively short. It is 19 short blessings. 19, it's not a big number. So if you had to come up, think about it, if you had to come up with a list of 19 needs, what should we be praying for every single day? 19 things. You know, you'd come up, I don't know, there's a whole list, 19 stuff. Okay. At this point, I don't think it's going to surprise you if I told you that we mention Mashiach in the Amidah prayer. One of the things we ask God for is good health, long life, good parnasa, right? We should make money, good livelihood. We also ask for Mashiach. But here's the thing. How many times do we ask God for Mashiach in the Amidah prayer? It's more than once. Is it going to surprise you if I told you 3 times? We ask God 3 times, but it's not 3, it's not 5, it's not 6. We ask for Mashiach 7 times in the Amidah prayer. Now, just think about that. There's only 19 blessings. 7 out of 19 blessings are focused on asking God, each time in a little bit of a different way, to bring Mashiach, bring us to the era of redemption. I'm saying that is already a little bit much. 7 out of 19 blessings. We only ask for health once, but Mashiach 7 times. Let's go through it a little bit quickly. It's in your books on page 47. We have here the 7 blessings which are focused on Mashiach. I just want to read with you the last line of each of these 7 blessings, just the closing of it. So on page 47, the second blessing concludes, blessed are you, Lord, who revives the dead, one of the features of Mashiach. Okay, 7th blessing, blessed are you, Lord, Redeemer of Israel. 10th blessing, blessed are you, Lord, who gathers the dispersed of his people Israel. 11th blessing, blessed are you, Lord, King who loves righteousness and justice. This is where we ask God to reinstate the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court in Jerusalem. 14th blessing, blessed are you, Lord, who rebuilds Jerusalem. 15th blessing, blessed are you, Lord, who causes the power of salvation to flourish. 17th blessing, blessed are you, Lord, who restores his divine presence to Zion. All right, this is a lot. And we don't just do this once, we do this in the morning, and then again in the afternoon prayers, then again in the evening prayers. We are mentioning the topic of a redemption and a Messiah dozens upon dozens of times every single day in Jewish prayer. What is going on? What is going on? Why is this just the biggest topic that we just cannot move away from? Another part of Jewish prayer, the grace after meals. Like Jewish tradition, you have a meal, you thank God for the food that you ate afterwards. So it's a beautiful thing, grace after meals. We thank God for all the blessings in life. We thank God for taking care of us. There are 4 blessings in the grace after meals. 1 out of 4 is focused on asking God to bring us back to the rebuilt Jerusalem. And by the way, rebuilt Jerusalem doesn't mean the way it is right now. Even today, a Jew who lives in Jerusalem still asks God to bring us back to the rebuilt Jerusalem. We mean the Messianic Jerusalem. We're in the Messianic era. So we're eating food. Again, we talk about Mashiach. I just counted this past Friday night for the first time because of this course. As I was benching, saying the Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals, as I was counting, how many times do we mention Mashiach in the grace after meals on a Friday evening for your Shabbos meal? I counted 6 times. So in 5 minutes, we're thanking God for food, and we mention the concept of Mashiach 6 times. We mentioned send us Elijah. That's another part. Send us Elijah, because Elijah is going to be the one to announce Mashiach to us. I'm just saying, this is a very heavy recurring theme. I'm saying we're literally belaboring this idea in Judaism. Okay, so that's Jewish prayer. Let's talk about the Jewish calendar. The Jewish calendar is filled throughout the entire year with mentions and with an emphasis on Mashiach. Yom Kippur, holiest day on the Jewish calendar, we conclude the prayers, the very climax of Yom Kippur. The entire synagogue screams together, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. That's how we conclude. So this is Yom Kippur. We conclude next year we got to be in Jerusalem. The Seder, of course, we know we also conclude next year in Jerusalem. In fact, the entire second half of the Seder is focused on the future. The Seder is really split into 2. The first half, we were speaking about history, how God took us out of Egypt, how God redeemed us in the past. The second half of the Seder, we're focused on the future. God will redeem us. That's why we have the cup of Elijah, because Elijah is connected with Mashiach. That is why we've concluded next year in Jerusalem. We fast. There are many fast days across the Jewish calendar. Most of them are remembering the destruction of Israel, of Jerusalem, and praying to return there. In fact, there's a 3-week period on the Jewish calendar. It happens each year in the summer, July time. And we're focused on remembering and mourning for the destruction of Jerusalem and Zion and the Holy Temple. So this is something which we're really heavily focused on also in the calendar, in the Jewish calendar. Let's talk about life cycle events, weddings. A young couple's getting married. There are 7 blessings you make under the wedding canopy. We bless God. We ask God to bring happiness to this couple, for example. 7 blessings. One of them is, it shall yet be heard in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem, the voice of happiness and the voice of joy. There's a wedding here, just a regular, a new husband and wife. And what do we have to say? Right away, we're talking about, well, we're happy. We can't wait till we can be happy in Jerusalem when all the Jews are back. What does Jerusalem have to do with the wedding? Someone's getting married. We have to start talking about Jerusalem. We want to go back to Jerusalem. Like, how does this fit in? And then we break the glass, which is another remembrance to Jerusalem. Okay, the Shiva home. For those of you who joined last course, right, we spoke about this a little bit. There are many customs and traditions in death and mourning that revolve around our belief in the coming of Mashiach. But the traditional text, the traditional greeting with which we comfort a mourner is, may God comfort you amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. We bring in again, we're all mourning Jerusalem. We're all mourning for Zion. Again, somebody passed away. This is a personal, this is a very personal loss. But in Judaism, we have to start bringing in Jerusalem. Again, you see this idea, Mashiach is just stuffed in anywhere and everywhere. And it makes you wonder, what is going on? What is with this? We can understand it's Jewish. We can understand it's a Jewish belief. Why is this becoming the hottest button topic to talk about. And one last thing, let's look at Jewish faith. And we spoke about this last week. Maimonides, the great Maimonides, codified the 13 principles of Jewish faith. He kind of selected only 13 beliefs which are central to Judaism, which means we Jews believe in a lot of stuff, but these are the 13. The whole Judaism is built upon these 13 principles. It's in your books on page 53. And we're not going to go through them right now. We could do a whole class, we do a whole series just going through these 13 principles. But really, if you read them, you could split up all these 13 principles into 4 categories. Really, Maimonides only talks about 4 topics. Number 1 is God. We can all understand Judaism is predicated upon the belief in God. If there's no God, there's no Judaism, right? I think we can all understand that, right? So it makes perfect sense that Judaism needs a belief in God as fundamental to the faith. All right. The next one is prophecy. You need to believe that God could communicate with man, because if not, you don't even believe in Moses. A very big part of Judaism is Moses, the prophets. God continued to communicate with us. That's important to Judaism. All right, that makes sense. Number 3 is the belief in the Torah. You got to believe the Torah is true. Again, that makes perfect sense. If there's no acceptance of the Torah, there's no Judaism. The 4th topic is Moshiach. You got to believe in Moshiach. So the future redemption, the Messianic era, is as fundamental to Judaism as a belief in God. What does that mean, right? Mashiach has some pretty good company over here. God, prophecy, Torah, Mashiach. And if you put this all together over here, you realize there's got to be something. There has to be something about this concept of a future redemption, of a Messianic era, of a Mashiach, that maybe we're missing. What is so important about it? What is so central about it that Judaism is simply obsessed with it? What do you think? What do you think? First of all,
the future.
What was that?
A belief that there's a
But why is that central to Judaism?
future, because we have to, with all that we're going through, we have to have something to look forward to.
Oh.
We're looking forward to being painless. We're looking forward to being better. We're just looking to a future that's better than what we're.
Okay, you just muted yourself. Okay, but I hear you, right? When things are doing so bad, it's vital that one has hope for the future. Is that what you're saying, David?
Yes. Yes.
So then let me ask you a question. What about when things weren't so bad? Was Mashiach also very critical to Judaism then?
If it's not so bad for me, but there's others, for the whole community, we're looking for a better future.
So when the Jewish people were living a time of comfort, 2,500 years ago, the Jews did not even experience this. There's no exile. The Jews lived in Israel. They had a temple. First of all, was Mashiach important then? Or is Mashiach only a later day important thing, but then it wasn't important?
I think it's important from all time.
Right, but according to your idea, why would it be important then?
Because we still have to believe in a future.
Things were good then. Things were great. Everything we're hoping for, they had. Jerusalem, a temple, a Sanhedrin, everything, you know. Jewish leadership was beautiful. Meaning you would be right, David. I agree with you. It's a good theory that when you're suffering for 2,000 years, barely making it out alive, you need to have that hope to hold on to. But according to that reasoning, that would mean that the whole concept of Mashiach is a 2,000-year-old idea.
The idea of the Jewish people and the world becoming back close to God to rise up and to become closer to God, his principles and how to live as a human being. And that was the idea. Even if you're living in good times, nothing's 100%.
The idea that we could get
I would think you want to be closer to, in every age, you want to make yourself at the point where you are completely redeemed. Maybe complete redemption, it was never complete.
Right.
I
That's
don't
true.
know.
And I think this is a good point to make a mention of something, which is a common, I won't call it a misconception because it is true to a degree, but it's not true as the entire answer. There's no question that Mashiach is the solution to all of our suffering. Jewish people have suffered for 2,000 years. And there's no question that this was something Jews have always been looking forward to. And this actually was our way out. So Jews always did have hope. So, and then it got a thing that what's Mashiach? Mashiach is our way of leaving exile. It's the Jews get out of jail card. When you play Monopoly, you got to get out of jail card. So Mashiach is the oppressed Jews get out of jail card. And some even have the belief that Mashiach is a more modern day invention of Judaism, which means when in Jewish history did we come up with the idea of Mashiach? When we went into exile, which means it's a solution to a problem. When you got a problem, you come up with a remedy. So Mashiach is there to help us get out of exile. And that I think is a common conception about Mashiach. What's the purpose of Mashiach? A way to get us out of exile. Once we got into exile, we needed a way out. That's why we have Mashiach. The only problem is that if you look back to the sources of Mashiach, you will see Mashiach predates exile. Moses speaks about the vision of a Messiah, the Messianic era. The prophets, the great prophets living 2,500 years ago, 2,700 years ago. There was no exile then. There was a temple then. The Jews still didn't even enter their first exile. And they're already prophesying about a Messianic age. And there you see this idea, Mashiach is deeper than a get out of jail card for the Jewish people. Mashiach is not the answer to an exile, it runs even deeper. Simply by the fact, we've been talking about this before we ever had problems. Moses speaks to the Jews about it in the desert. They didn't even enter Jerusalem yet. Jewish history kind of didn't even begin yet. We're still in the desert, 40 years in the desert, ain't nothing doing. And Moses is already telling us about the future. There's going to be a Mashiach. God's going to gather all of you from all the corners of the world. So we see over there, Mashiach is deeper than just getting us out of exile. It's more fundamental than that. And we could take this even a step further. We could trace the idea of Mashiach to the very, very beginning of the Torah. How did, Wendy, I'll just tell you, Wendy, lesson 4. All right? We can trace Mashiach to the very beginning of the Torah. How does the Torah begin? In the beginning, God created heavens and the earth, right? Let's read that. David, would you like to read? Let's read text 4a on page 56. And you got to unmute. There you go.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was chaotic and desolate, and darkness was on the face of the watery depths, and the Spirit of God hovered upon the waters.
All right, so Torah says, in the beginning, God creates heaven and the earth. This is the very first moment of the 6 days of creation. God didn't even create light yet. And, so the world has nothing. There are no properties to the world. It's like energy without matter. And the Torah describes the world as being chaotic, desolate, because nothing concrete was made yet. No light, no darkness, nothing. The only thing that we know is there's a Spirit of God hovering above the waters. Spirit of God. So our sages ask, the Medrash asks, what exactly is the Spirit of God? Let's read text 4b. Dr. Lieb, would you like to read?
Sure.
There you go. Page 57.
The Spirit of God hovered above the waters. This is the soul of Mashiach. The meaning of this midrash is, in the passage, God is foretelling the end of the beginning. The Torah's intention is to indicate the end of time at the very beginning of time, to teach us that the ultimate purpose of God's creation of the world is the days of Mashiach. Thus, the original thought is actualized in the conclusion of the work.
The world is not even created yet. Humanity, there are no humans. Nothing's doing yet. But there's a spirit, there's a mission. Mashiach is already in the air. And what that means is the purpose, the end game for creation is there. And this leads us to a very fun, very deep question. Why did God create a world? It's a question of all questions. What made God wake up one day, this perfect God who needs nothing, infinite? I need a world today. Why? Why did God decide one day to make a world? And it's a very personal question. Why am I here? Why does God want me here? What am I doing here? What is the purpose? What is the purpose of everything? What's the purpose of Judaism? You know, we Jews have been fighting for Judaism for so long. We're doing and we sacrifice so much to be Jews and to do Jewish things. What are we in this fight for? Just tradition? Tradition, so we'll do it. What is the purpose of everything? And the answer is one word. The purpose for everything is Mashiach. You know why the world got spinning in the first place? For Mashiach. You know why you're here? For Mashiach. Which is an unbelievable idea, but what does that even mean? What about Mashiach is the purpose? But this is what we know already. We at least have a premise now. That if you do some digging in Judaism, you'll see Mashiach is not just another topic. It is at the center of Judaism. It's at the center of purpose for everything. And this is why, could be some of you saw it. I made a little promo video for this course. I recorded a little promo video. I put it up on Facebook. Could be a bunch of you saw it. And I said in that video that you don't understand Judaism until you understand Mashiach, which was a pretty big, pretty daring statement to make, but it's true. If the purpose of everything is Mashiach, that's the master key to understanding everything. So what we're going to do right now for the rest of today's class is try to understand, what is that purpose? What is that quality of Mashiach? What about it? What's the essence of it, which is the purpose of everything? And that actually unlocks the purpose of Judaism, the purpose of life, everything. This actually becomes an integral topic, much larger than just a messianic era. This touches at the heart and soul of Judaism in its most deepest way. Let's go through this over here. I'll just we'll go through these slides. Number one, Mashiach is not just a solution to our exile. This is very important. It's the ultimate purpose of God's creation of the world, is the days of Mashiach. This is not just a get out of jail card if you need it. This was the reason why the world was created. And these were the four things we've learned so far today about Mashiach. It's a central pillar of Jewish faith. It's central to Jewish prayer and practice. It predates exile, and it even predates creation. It's the reason for creation. And with all this, we need to now understand it. Why? What about Mashiach makes it so central to who we are? You ready to jump in? Now we're going to have to get a little bit deep. We want to understand the very essence of Mashiach. We want to understand how this essence is the purpose of creation, the reason why it all ever got spinning. You see, everything you learn, all the prophecies about Mashiach are all symptoms. World peace is a symptom. It's a consequence. It's a manifestation. When Mashiach is here, automatically there's world peace. When Mashiach is here, automatically the world is filled with the knowledge of God. But none of these define Mashiach, right? It's like the elephant. Yeah, there's a foot, there's a tail, there's a tusk. Doesn't define it. We right now want to define Mashiach. And I want to preface with you two things. Number one, we're about to learn a very beautiful but deep concept in Jewish mysticism. That's number one. It's going to be a little bit deep. We're going to get a little bit Kabbalistic. My goal is to not lose any of you for the rest of tonight's presentation. And so God willing, we'll work through this slowly. But number two, it's a big topic. And what we're about to start studying together is going to take us through next week's class. So we're not even going to fully finish this understanding of Mashiach at tonight's class, which is something which I usually try not to do in these JLI courses because we want each class to be a standalone topic. But over here, so we'll learn today, and then it's gonna, we're gonna continue. We're gonna complement. We're gonna do another class where we'll all come together, a part two, and then you'll really fully understand this concept. But it's a deep concept. It's a beautiful concept. So let's do this. Let's jump in. This comes from the Tanya. The Tanya, could be some of you are familiar, is a real classic of Jewish mysticism called Jewish Kabbalah, but it's really Hasidus, the Hasidic thought. It's authored by the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, and it's considered like the Bible of Hasidic thought, the seminal work of Hasidic thought. And in this book, 53 chapters, he has a few chapters which are dedicated to this exact question. What's the purpose of the world? Why are we here? What's the point of life? What's the end game? So let's start reading a little bit. Let's read text 5 on page 60. Gail, would you like to read? All right.
The primordial desire. As is known, the sages have said that the purpose of the creation of this world is that God desired that he should have a home in the lowly world. It is also known that the days of Mashiach, and especially the time of the resurrection of the dead, are the fulfillment and culmination of the creation of this world and the purpose for which it was originally created.
Okay, let's unpack this over here. Now we at least have a one-line mission statement. And I want you to remember this, right? This is the key phrase over here. I'm going to put it up also over here on your screen. The purpose of creation is for God to have a dwelling place, a home in this lowly world. And when does that happen? That's Mashiach. So Mashiach is when God gets a home in this lowly world. One line mission statement right there. So why did God create a world? Because he wanted a home in the lowly world. There's a lot to unpack there. Let's understand that. But that is essentially Mashiach, and that's the purpose of creation. Let's read one more text, also from the Tanya. And over here we see this concept again, that this is the purpose of all of creation. Lisa, would you like to read? Text 6.
The purpose of it all. This is what the human being is all about. This is the purpose of the human being's creation and of the creation of all worlds, both the lofty and the lowly, that God should have this home in the lowly world.
All right, so this is what life is all about. God had a desire to have a home in the lowly world, and that is why the world was created. That's what everything is about. And God having a home in the lowly world equals Mashiach. But let's understand this. Let's really intellectually understand this. All right, let's jump in over here. According to Kabbalah, according to Jewish mysticism, there are many worlds. When God created the world, there's not just one world, the world that we know of, there are actually 4 worlds. You could take a look, it's in your books on page 65, and I'll also share it here on the screen with you. Here are the 4 worlds according to Kabbalah. On the top, we have a world called Atzilut, emanation, the world of emanation. The next world is Beriah, the world of creation, Yetzirah, formation, and the world of Asiya, the world of action. We humans, souls and bodies, we inhabit the lowest world called the world of action, the world of Asiya. We live in the lowest bar of reality, in the lowest realm, the lowest sphere of reality. But Kabbalah says, but there are different worlds. There are higher worlds. These are the worlds of the angels, worlds where souls are before they come into a body and after they leave a body. And there are, generally speaking, 4 worlds. Okay. Now, let's start trying to define that. We just said there are higher worlds, and then we said there are lower worlds. What makes a world higher and what makes a world lower? What about it makes it high, and what about it makes it low? Any ideas? What do you say?
Mitzvahs, how many mitzvahs you do, how many commandments you keep. that
So
God gave
world,
us.
okay, any other ideas?
The ability to see God or to communicate with God or to be closer to God.
The ability to see God, how close you are to God.
Yeah.
All right. Let's unpack this. Well, the first thing is, I think we can all understand pretty simply that when we say there are higher worlds and there are lower worlds, we don't mean that in the spatial sense. Which means it doesn't mean that if you could take a spaceship and go up a certain amount of miles in the air, then you reach a new world. No, that's not what it means. It's not spatially. There's actually only one physical world. So no matter how far out you go with a spaceship, you're still in our world. You're still in our reality, which is the lowest level of reality, called the world of Asiya, the lowest world. So it doesn't mean spatially, right? It's like similar to saying your kid comes home from school, they get a report card, they get their report card, they are an A+ student. It's amazing. Last year, they were a C student. So right now, they've made their way up. They got a higher mark. They're a higher level student. Now, does a higher level student mean that they went up a floor in the school building? Right? Of course not. That we don't mean higher in that sense. It doesn't mean spatially. You can understand that, right? Not higher, lower does not have to mean spatial. But it rather means conceptually. There's something about it in the conceptual sense that makes it a higher world versus a lower world. There's a quality to it that makes it higher or makes it lower. So I'm right now going to share with you a misconception in the world of Jewish mysticism. All right. There's a mistake that sometimes made in this discussion of higher worlds and lower worlds. That the higher world is closer to God. Let's think about it. There's a big God up there. And then there's a higher world, which is very close to God. And then there is a lower world, which is very distant from God. So in that sense, there's a way to interpret higher and lower as being the closer you are to God, that's a higher world, right? So angels are very close to God. That's why they live in a higher world. That's what makes their world high. We live so far from God. That's why we're called a very low world. So that's one way of interpreting higher and lower. How close or distant are you from God? But that's a very big problem. That's very problematic to say, because God is everywhere. God is equally everywhere. God is in the world of the angels, and God is here in this room, and God is in your room, and God is in this cup equally. So in relation to God, we are all equally as close to God. You, an angel, a soul in heaven, every God is everywhere. So rather, what makes a world higher or lower is something a little bit more subjective. It's how aware is this world of the presence of God? How revealed is God in this world? In the higher worlds, there's a strong awareness of God. You can sense God very acutely. Angels know God naturally. It's natural. They didn't have to go to class and have to convince themselves rationally, philosophically, that there's a God that exists. In the world of the angels, right, in the higher worlds, God is simply reality. We look out the window, we see grass, we see trees, there's oxygen we breathe, there's relationships, right? We have a natural relationship to our parents. We have a natural relationship to our children. Nobody had to sit down with us and have to teach us that we're parents after we had children and kind of intellectually convince us, right? It's natural. It's naturally apparent. That's how angels experience God. They are very aware of God naturally. The reason why we are the lowest world is because we have a very low level of awareness of God. Okay, let's unpack this. What does that mean? There's a higher level of awareness, a lower level of awareness. Okay, let's unpack this. When God created the world, God wanted to create a world. There's only one problem. When you're a God and you want to create a world, your very existence as a God doesn't really leave any space for a world. Because a world is a something, is something else. A human being is a something else. Now, if you're a God and you are everything and you are infinite and there's nothing that is not you, that kind of doesn't allow space for something else to exist. And for that reason, the only way God could create a world, another, something else from him, was only if God kind of hides himself and creates a sense of emptiness where something else could exist. If God didn't do that, life wouldn't be able to exist. Okay, let me give you an example. Imagine Mickey Mouse, right? The animated character had a consciousness. He was conscious. He was conscious. All right, so he's an animated character, but just imagine that Mickey Mouse has a conscious, is aware of itself, and it thinks it's real. It thinks it has choices. It thinks it has a life. It thinks it has relationships, and it's it's enjoying life. It feels like a autonomous human being, or an autonomous something, an autonomous being with choices. Okay, and then imagine what would happen to Mickey Mouse if he would all of a sudden get an objective view of who is he really. And he'll discover that he's actually nothing more than simply the figment of the imagination of his animators. And there's not a single element of his life which wasn't created and hand-drawn by the animators. Every single frame of his life was made by animators. And really, he doesn't even exist. He's just simply a character on a piece of paper. What would happen to Mickey Mouse when he would realize that? Just what would be the psychological effect of having that awareness? What would that do to you? You can't exist anymore under that condition. You're done. Your life is over. You lost any sense of independence. You lost any sense of self. You lost any sense of choice. You have no choice. Well, that's what would happen to us if God didn't conceal himself. We are simply God. That's what we are. Our whole world is God. Everything is God. The only problem is that God wants the world to be able to exist, and with the sense of self, with the sense of independence, with the sense of autonomy, with the sense of choice. And that is only possible if God can kind of get out of the picture. Because if God would let us know that really it's all him, it's all his infinite self, we would lose it. We would simply not be able to exist. You know how we know this? Because God tried it once. At Mount Sinai, God showed up to the Jewish people and said, here I am. You know what happened on the spot? Everybody fainted instantly. Life is over. There's also something else. You can't feel separate. You can't feel, if we're all God, then there's no, then I'm not me and you're not you. And, there's no sense of a me. There's no sense of ego. Existence thrives off of ego. We need to feel like a mensch. We need to be able to wake up in the morning and feel that we have something to, we're hungry, we got to take care of ourselves, we have to accomplish. That's a drive of life. If we lose that sense of being, we're done. So God had this problem. I want to create a world. I want to create humans. I want to create a lot of creatures, but they can't exist if I'm in the picture. So therefore, what God does, and it's actually one of the most central components of God's creation of the world, is God hiding himself. God conceals himself. God obscures himself. And that is the very condition, right? The necessary condition for life on our planet. We're searching Mars, looking for if there are the right conditions for human survival, right? For human life. There's also spiritual conditions. A spiritual condition for life is that God stays out of the picture. So even though God is here, God has to hide himself. If God doesn't hide himself, that does not allow anything else to exist. Everything else simply falls apart. There's no life. You can't be something else from God. There can't be God and me if God is right in front of you. You lose that illusion. So what God does is God creates this type of illusion for all of us. It's like a one-sided mirror, right? You ever saw those? You ever seen those things? From one side, it's a mirror. You can't see through it. On the other side, it's see-through. So God hiding himself is not actually God leaving. God is still here. But God creates it that from our perspective, he's nowhere to be found. This is the idea of concealment. And this actually explains something fascinating. How do you say the word world in Hebrew? Any of you know? Shelly, what was that? Was that? Were you answering that? No. How do you say the word world in Hebrew?
Olam.
Olam. Olam, world. What's the etymology of the word olam? What does that mean? So let me share this with you. The word olam means world. It comes from the Hebrew he'elam, concealment. You want to know what the world is? It's one big concealment. At the very nature, at the very essence of creation is the act of God hiding himself. All right. Now we could go back to the concept of higher worlds and lower worlds. If you look back to page 65, you'll see the highest world, Atzilut, the world of emanation, that's a higher world, because in that world, God is not hiding himself too much. God hides himself a lot because angels need to be able to exist, and they also need to kind of feel like an entity, like a being. They need to have their sense of self. But in the world of Atzilot, God is still there. God is not fully hidden. There's still a natural awareness of God, right? An angel knows that there's a God because that's nature. The same way you know that there's grass outside. And the same way you know that there's a sky and there's a sun. It's part of the fabric of nature for an angel because God is there. On the next level, Berea, the concealment gets stronger. God is still there, but more hidden. The third world, Yetzirah, more hidden until you get to the last world. Our world, Asiya, is where God pulls all the stops. 100% concealment. We live in the only space on earth, not only on earth, we are the only world of creation where you cannot find God. And think about this. Nature, there's nothing in this world that will ever tell you that there is a God. Now, that's not to mean that you can't believe in a God. That's not to mean that we shouldn't believe in God. But you will never find God with your five senses. God will never be tangible. God will never be as much of a reality as the fact that you are hungry. Think about that. People dedicate their lives to living a godly life, but that God is not as real to them than the fact that they're hungry. Hungry is more of a reality than a belief in God. A belief in God will always be an intellectual acceptance, a philosophical truth. I accept it. Somebody had to tell this to me. If nobody ever told it to you, you would never come to the conclusion that there's a God. More or less. All right, this table will never tell you there's a God. It can tell you a lot about this world. It will never tell you there's a God. That's the idea. God is simply not something that nature will tell you about. So we live in a unique realm where God is 100% concealed. And this is why we are called the lowly world. We are the lowest level in the chain of worlds in all of creation because God is simply MIA. God is missing in action. God is gone. How are we doing so far? Let us read text 8. Shelley, did you read? Would you like to read?
No, I'm just enjoying listening.
Okay, no problem then. Pam, would you like to read? Should we pass you on as well? No? There you go. All right, Pam, text 8. Let's read.
Okay, text 8. Okay, the fact that every creation and event appears to be as tangible and real is only because we do not apprehend and see with our physical eyes the godly energy and divine breath within each creation. But if the eye were allowed to see and apprehend the vitality and spirituality being infused into every creature by the divine utterance, the physicality, materiality, and substance of that creation would be utterly invisible to us. As such, there literally is nothing besides him.
All right, so this is what God had to do. God had to conceal himself for the purpose of creation being viable and creation being able to exist. Which this means that our world that we live in is a very interesting paradox. On the one hand, our world is nothing other than God. Think about Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse is nothing more than the creation of his animator. Right? His scene, the people in his life, everything. It's just all the animator. That's us. This world is nothing other than God. God is making this world at every moment. God is giving life to this world at every moment. But yet, this world lives naturally in total denial of what it really is. This God is naturally in denial of its creator. It's naturally agnostic, right? That's the word. It's naturally agnostic. It's naturally just, it's a godless world. That's our world. Our world is constantly living in denial of the God that's making it, right? Denial is not just a river in Egypt. You knew that, right? We're all in denial and we're not in Egypt. Okay, so the natural state of the world is denial of God. Okay, but that's exactly what God wanted. God, the purpose of creation is for there to be a world, a space, a reality, which is a place totally void of God, devoid of God, divorced from God. That's what God wants. God wants a place which is 100% independent, with a sense of independence from him. A world that could feel that it lives without God, doesn't need God, and could go against God. That's exactly what God wanted. Think about it. The more spiritual worlds, the higher worlds, they can't offer anything new to God. Think about it. What could an angel give to God? Spirituality? God doesn't have that already. In the higher worlds, which are spiritual worlds, the only thing they have to offer is a watered down version of spirituality. God doesn't need that. The unique part of God's creation is specifically our realm of creation, which is absolute, what we'll call spiritual darkness. There's no God. And that's exactly what God wanted. In creation, God was not looking for revelation. God was looking for concealment. God wasn't looking for perfection. God was looking for imperfection. God was not looking for a godly world, for a spiritual world. God was looking for the total opposite, a world without God, a very materialistic world. That's the purpose. God wants that imperfection. Why? Because God's already perfect. The only new thing to God, which is so perfect, is imperfection. Do you know what's more perfect than perfect? When imperfection creates perfection. Let me explain that to you. God wanted there to be a world which naturally has no God. And then God wanted that world, not because it was forced to, not because that's its nature to, but that world on its own should lift itself up to be a home for God. The darkness should turn into light, but by the darkness's own initiative. So God created this world which could live totally independent of himself, of God, and created us, humans, Jews, souls, into that world. And we are now part of that world. We now are part of that condition of the total concealment. And the purpose of creation is that there should be a place where there's no God, and that place should invite God in, make a home for God. That is the purpose of creation. Going back to the mission statement, God wanted a home in the lowest world. So God made a lowest world, a world where there's no God, and then God wants us to invite him in. That's the purpose. That's also what it means to be partners in creation. When we do that, when we invite God in, when we kind of transform the world to be a world where we could bring God into this world, we invite God in. That is actually when the concealment will turn into revelation. Then actually we'll see God, we'll experience God in this physical world. Let's read text 11. Ron, would you like to read text 11, page 71?
Sure. Those two lines. No longer shall your master be cloaked. Your eyes will see your master.
See, this is one of the prophecies about Mashiach. A little bit poetic. Right now, we don't see God. When Mashiach comes through this process of inviting God in, we will be able to see God with our eyes. It won't be obscured anymore. And that's what God wants. God wants that there should be a place of darkness, a godless place that place should itself lift itself up to become godly, to bring God in. And that's the point. This is a process that started at the beginning of time, and we're still in the middle of that process. That's the goal. And to Joel's question, Mashiach is when we finish the process of bringing God into this world. This also explains something else about Judaism. Judaism is a very unique religion in the sense that we are not very into abandoning reality. Other religions are very into transcendence, spirituality, kind of like, let go of reality. Judaism is very not like that. Judaism is unbelievably down to earth, very action-based. Every holiday we're eating food, doing stuff, shake a lulav, blow a shofar, build a sukkah. We're always doing stuff, because that's the whole point. The point of life, the point of creation is not spirituality. The point is to change the physical, bring God into the physical. Don't abandon the physical. God doesn't need that. It's specifically the physical that God wants. Let's read that in text 9. Elke, would you like to read? We'll go back to text 9, page 68. This is Moses speaking to the Jews.
I have no book.
Oh, you still didn't get your book?
No,
Okay.
no, I can't read.
Yes, yeah, that's a problem. Okay, Wendy, would you like to read? Text 9, page 68. No problem.
Oh, wait, I wasn't unmuted. I don't know how you heard me talking. Okay. This mitzvah that I command you this day is not mysterious to you, nor is it far away. It is not in heaven that you should say, who will go up to heaven for us and get it for us and teach it to us so that we can do it? Rather, the matter is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart to do it.
Moses says, I'm giving you a Torah. Don't think this Torah is distant. Don't think you have to kind of leave earth to be a Jew. It's practical. Judaism is action-based because there's a goal, there's a mission statement of Judaism. Engage with the physical world, transform the physical world, change the physical world from a world of darkness and bring in God, bring in light. Right? So I want to share with you the slide over here. Right? Judaism, we are not into abandonment of the physical state in a quest for a higher spiritual existence. All right, let's strike that out. Rather, we're all about physical mitzvahs, do stuff, do deeds. Engage with the physical world and transform that physical world. That is what life is all about. This, friends, is the mission statement. God created a very low world, a world where he is basically not present, at least to us. The world does not realize God. It's a world that from its perspective does not have a God. It's a godless world. It's a dark world. And God wants that world to be transformed to a world of light, to a world where God can come in. Essentially, the way to think about it is God wanted to be invited by somebody else. So God had to make a somebody else. And then we have to invite God in. We're the somebody else. And we get to change the world, make the world into a better place and bring God in. Now we can start understanding a lot. Everything about Mashiach that we've learned, world peace, no hunger, knowledge of God will cover the earth. These are all symptoms. Do you know why our world has hunger? Do you know why our world has death? You know why our world has war and jealousy? It's simply because of the darkness. With no God, you've got a world with problems. Meaning, why are there problems in our world? It's a symptom of a condition, that the lights are off. Think about when the lights go off in our home, right? There's a blackout. It's a little bit scary. You walk around very slowly. You could trip. You could hurt yourself. You can bump into somebody because you're living in darkness. When the lights go on, it's beautiful. There's clarity. There's space for everything. There's purpose for everything. Everything could go into its place. Mashiach is simply one thing and one thing only. When the lights in the world turn on. When God comes in and there's a certain enlightenment, a clarity. And with that clarity, everything falls into place. Goodness comes into the world. People become good simply because of that awareness. And it has spiritual benefits and it has universal practical benefits. But these are all symptoms of this condition of God entering the world. And I want to share with you here this beautiful concept. You see this over here? This is the Hebrew word for exile. Gola. Gola means exile. Okay. What is the word, right? The opposite. What is the opposite of exile? What do you say? Redemption. Exile, redemption. They're diametrical opposites. How do you spell redemption in Hebrew? Look what happens. All you got to do is add one letter. One letter, and you have redemption. So think about that. Exile, redemption, so similar. There's only one letter. Only one thing changes. What letter are we adding? The letter Aleph. What does the letter Aleph represent? Aleph is the first letter. It means one. Aleph represents God. Mashiach coming, if you want to kind of bring it down to its very essence, is only one thing and one thing only. It's not the world changing. No, it's going to be the same world, right? It's not a different word. Same word, just changing one letter. Same world, we're just going to do one more thing. We bring in the Aleph. It goes from Gola to Geula. Dr. Lieb, Geula. It's not a silent Aleph. For everything to change is only one part. Bring in God. Bring in God, and that's it. Same world, just the lights are on. That is the purpose of creation. That is the purpose of Judaism. Judaism has only one goal, one mission statement, and it is to bring God into this world. Make this home into a home for God. Everything about Judaism is with that agenda, nothing else. And why are we here? We are here to be the people, the foot soldiers of this mission. We get to be God's partners. We get to be the other person who invites God in. How do we do it? That's going to be next week's class. So how do we get this process going? The way this process happens is going to be a full class on itself next week. But this is the idea. What's Mashiach? Making a home for God in our world. That's the purpose of everything. Why are we here? You really want to know why we're here? It's to make a home for God in our world. That's it. Everything else is commentary. And that is the secret. This is the essence of what Mashiach is. And this is really the essence of what Judaism is. What does God have in mind? What's the end game? What's the goal? Where are we trying to get to? It's this place where we could bring and reintroduce God back into our world, our independent, autonomous world, bring God into that. And for how we do it, we'll talk about that next week. All right, friends, it's 8:46, which means we're ending class early, which is good because this was very heavy. Right? All right, so we don't want to do cognitive overload if we haven't already done that. And if any of you have questions, let's do that. Let's do that. Now, okay, I want to give you all a challenge. You ready for a challenge? This entire class was based on one text that we did not read. And when you read this text, you will know why we did not read this text in class. I feared that if we read this text in class, we would bomb the class on the spot, right? A swift murder of this class. because it's a very dense text. It's a very difficult text, and it's a great way to lose everybody, and confuse everybody. But I want to now give you a little bit of homework that, on your own, read text 7 slowly, and you'll see everything that we've learned today is in this pretty short text, very dense text from the Tanya. All right, but that's the idea. I want to give you an intellectual understanding of this mission statement, this fundamental mission statement, making a home for God in this world.
Wait, Rabbi,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, which text?
Text 7.
7, okay.
Text 7. Read the text 7, and it'll be an experience for you to see. We just spent close to an hour just explaining text 7, and really we could do it for another 2 hours.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I want to ask you now, from what you talked about, it seems to me that you're explaining that the Mashiach is actually, not an entity. I mean, not like a human being. And but it's a time when like you explained, when we bring God closer, when we reach those levels and change the earth so it'll be like heaven. But the thing that I don't understand is the Jewish people in the Bible, at the time of the Bible, they were all, at least the rabbis and the philosophers, very wise people. Why did they seem to feel that this was a human being? Like there were many false prophets before Jesus Christ, okay? But they listened to him, the people. They thought that was their Mashiach, Are we looking at it differently than what they look, or am I looking at it differently? Should we expect at some time someone who looks like a human being to come in and usher in the Mashiach age? It's
Okay.
a long question.
Very, very good question, and very important question. Mashiach is an era which will be, let me put it this way. The era begins with a person leading us into that era. But it's primarily a time, a period of time.
Okay.
We get ushered into that period of time by an usherer named Mashiach. Now, we do believe that has to be a human being. We'll learn about that in lesson 5. Lesson 5 will be talking about the person Mashiach. Why does he have to be human? How are we going to know how are we going to know if he's Mashiach? I could tell you I'm Mashiach. Prove me wrong. So how do we know? So here's part of the thing. Just by the way, Jesus was never accepted as a Mashiach in mainstream Judaism. Never. It wasn't like he ever had a real following within Jewish circles. I'm sure there were Jews who followed him, Jews who converted out. But let's be very, very clear. We actually do have a little bit of a dark history with falling prey to false messiahs. Famously, Shabtai Tzvi in the 1600s, in the 17th century. We'll talk about that in lesson 5. But Jesus was not one of the false messiahs that ever got the Jewish community behind him. All right? But it's a time which gets ushered in by a human being.
But we did have prophets, didn't we, Rabbi Doe? Rabbi Dubo?
Yes, we did have prophets.
Yeah.
Okay. So next week we'll talk about the process of how we get to do this and what is our role in this enterprise of making the world a home for God. Lesson 4, the next class, we'll talk about history, the progress throughout history, where we kind of see some benchmarks throughout Jewish history and throughout all of world history. So it's going to be an interesting class, lesson 4, to kind of trace the storyline of how our progress has been doing.
I thought we were going to lesson 3 next week, no?
Yeah, no, lesson 3. I'm just saying, after lesson 3, lesson 4, we'll be doing the timeline.
Yeah, gotcha.
Wendy is asking a great question. Why? You're asking a good question, Wendy, a really good question. Why did God want to make a home down here? You want to know the answer? Because God desired it. And a desire by nature is not a rational thing. That's what Jewish mysticism says. To say that God needed it is heresy, because God can't need anything.
Right.
but this was a desire that is somewhat beyond reason. Now, that's not to mean that there are no reasons. I could give you reasons. But if you think deeply about these reasons, you'll always find a flaw in them. You'll come to the conclusion none of these reasons really ever are good enough of a reason for God. So one reason could be is that God was lacking in perfection. God was lacking someone else. God was lacking a relationship. Relationships can only happen if there's a vulnerability. But if you have everything and you are everything, there's no vulnerability, there's no partnership, there's no relationship.
This is heavy duty.
I'm saying
It's like I'm back in college, like sitting around a little elevated and having these deep philosophical thing, where it just
Yeah.
takes you into another stratosphere.
Yeah, this is the secret of life over here. This is the
I was gonna say maybe he was lonely, but apparently he couldn't be lonely because
Lisa, good stuff, right? Tech 7, huh?
Oh,
But
my
you see that Tech 7 is what I've been saying for the past hour, right? But you try understanding it on a raw level, it's. But
Rabbi, when you-
yes, Shelley, go ahead.
when you say desires are heresy, is it God's desire? Or is it
Sorry.
man's desire? Or is it desire?
I'm sorry, Shelley. What I meant was to say that God needs something is borderline heresy. Because that means that God is not perfect. That means that God is not infinite. Infinity, if infinity is lacking something, that means it's not infinite. It's limited in some way. So in Jewish mysticism, the conclusion is there's no reason. Meaning there are reasons to a degree, but there'll never be an absolute reason, which this is the reason behind the desire. No, it's not the way it works. It's a desire, and we can think about it a little bit in our own desires. When you have a very deep desire, sometimes it comes from the deepest part of you, and it's subconscious. It's super rational. It's beyond a logic. It's just, this is what I need. This is what I want. It reaches much deeper into you than your intellect. But it's a good question, Wendy. What's the reason for it? And there's good reasons, but it'll never be a fully satisfactory reason. And ultimately, it is a desire is something which is unquestionable.
May I say something to
Sure,
that?
go ahead, Elke.
More from a scientific point of view, eternity, we don't know exactly what that looks like, but there's really actually nothing. It's a perfectly balanced state of something. So the only thing that brought this balance out of balance was God's desire. There's only God's desire that makes something happen.
Right. Yeah.
I have one more question. Are we in the process of trying to achieve this? Is the point from our perspective that it makes our life, whatever time we have here, more meaningful, more positive, more, like, why would we want to do this?
Good question. How radical should I be, Wendy?
You can be radical.
Since when was life about me and you? Who said life is about living life that's good and pleasurable and content for me? Right? Whoever said life's about me, maybe life is only about God. And maybe we're just here to fulfill God's desire. Maybe.
Wow. On that,
I feel like
I'm saying good night.
I
Thank
warned
you.
I feel like
you I'm going to be radical.
being more connected to this concept, though, at least for me personally, good or bad, it just makes me feel more connected to something bigger than myself.
Yeah. Now, Wendy, that doesn't mean that we have to suffer fulfilling God's desire. The beauty of nature is that God made it that our best life is when we live up to our mission to fulfill God's desire.
Mhm.
But it's not about us. God did us a favor that it happens to be that we also get to have a good, pleasurable, fulfilling, and content life when we are part of this mission. But it was never about us. We weren't born, right, for us to live up the life. Like, I remember I once heard the story. It's a good story that there was once a Jew who was having a difficult time with life, and he went to the Rebbe, to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he told the Rebbe, "I'm having such a bad life." And the Rebbe told him, "Since when did you have a contract with God that you're going to have an easy life? Like, we have this whole expectation. We're coming with complaints. What happened to my life? Since when was this about you?" But I'm being radical over here. But being radical is good. I'm saying if we want to be honest, we could ask these questions. I'm saying these are points to ponder. That's the idea. The goal is to make the home for God in this world. The good news is we're already deep into the process. And the proof is in the pudding. The world is progressing, as per last week's class. That's a symptom of an underlying condition. What's the condition? The world is becoming a more godly place. We'll talk about that. But if you think about it, you could actually see it. Trends are changing. What's trending in the human condition? People are changing. We spoke about this. Attitudes are changing. The lights are slowly going on.
Okay.
All right. I think I gave you enough to think about for a week, huh?
Rabbi, I'm not going to sleep for a week.
I only slept for 3 hours last night. This class was weighing me down.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now I need to get a good night's sleep.
Okay. Good night.
All right, guys. All right, friends. Have a
Thank
great
you.
night. We'll see you.
This was great.
Thank you. Stay
All right.
well.
Have a great one. Take care. Bye-bye.
Rabbi.